Open Conversations, Foundation at Fault, Modernity, Constitution, Wokeism. Our journey today shall be taking an overview of modernity, core values on which modernity is based, Constitution of India and constitutions of Anglo-Saxon countries at large, Wokeism, its genesis, its connection to the closure of modernity, and an approach to save civilization from Wokeism. The context in which we are discussing today's subject is best described by three facts of our times. The first fact of globally, wokeism and conservatism are in a world war situation, and they constitute two extremes of a continuum. What this conflict has done is to annihilate the entire middle part of the ideological spectrum. All hybrid ideological options have been annihilated in this contest between the two extremes. In some countries, we see this situation emerging. In some countries, we see this situation almost having established itself. On the surface, we see wokeism as the dominant, more powerful, more vocal ideology. But if we look beneath the surface, we see the other extreme emerging fast and strong. And this other extreme is the other pole of the spectrum, which is couched in all the politically correct language, just as wokeism is. But at its heart, it is a extremist, and in times to come, it might even turn out to be a totalitarian force. If not totalitarian, at least it will be an extreme force, usually with religion as one of the core parts of its ideological description, or rather ideological self-definition. So this is one part that in some countries we see extreme conservatism. In most Western countries, we see extreme wokeism, with extreme conservatism rearing to take its place in the next 10 years to come. And all the options in between. It's like capitalism and communism taking the stage and annihilating all forms of hybrid socialism in the spectrum in between. Second important fact of the present times is India is at a very critical point of its history. It is ready to make a transition to a Hindu Rashtra. And an important element in this transition is definition of Hindu Rashtra and definition of a Hindu constitution. And therefore also, what is it about the present constitution that is not in alignment with the historical movement to a Hindu Rashtra? And the third important defining point is the larger geopolitics of the world and the closure of modernity. The closure of modernity is at the foundation of the ideological superstructure that we see, which is in contest. And with the closure of modernity, it has been strangely accompanied by the fall of the power of the West. The West could not move beyond modernity and keep its power. It was too entangled with modernity. And therefore, the closure of modernity also has become simultaneously closure of the Western civilization, or rather, the hegemony of the Western civilization. And the new geopolitics which is emerging as the Western hegemony recedes. This new geopolitics has for its central concern the core of spirituality, religion, and a search beyond modernity on which a new geopolitical order can be based. And since there is no vision, it has reduced down to kingdom politics in a new package. Because we could not move beyond modernity ideologically with a convincing ideology, in real politics, we are receding back, we are regressing back to a pre-modern kingdom geopolitics. In this background, let us go into our discussion. When we say foundation at fault, what foundation are we referring? We are referring to the foundation of modernity, the foundation of Wokeism, and the foundation of Indian Constitution. There is a fault in the foundation, and the foundation is centered around the fault. And this basic fault, to use Berlin's phrase, is something we have to see through and transcend. And this transcendence is the core project, the core mission of human civilization at this point. How do you transcend modernity into its successor instead of regressing back to pre-modern kingdom politics? Let us first look at the fault in the foundation of the three and see later on how it plays out in the real world. So let us first look at what are the fundamental faults in the foundation of the three. When we go to that, first we have to look at two fundamental types of thinking: the blank paper thinking versus integrated and comprehensive and holistic thinking. The blank paper thinking is the tabula rasa thinking. And this is a thinking which is based upon an isolated, independent, self-sufficient system. So when we do tabula rasa thinking in the epistemology of mind, we look at mind as a system which is dependent only on the stimulus of the outside world. It's not dependent upon anything else in the process of thinking. Except for the stimulus, it is a standalone, isolated, self-sufficient, independent system. And this is the idea of an empty structure. You cannot escape the design of the structure, but you do not accept design in functionality. So this is the tabula rasa thinking applied to the epistemology of the mind. The same tabula rasa thinking can be applied to the creation of the constitution. That you look at constitution context free. And when you start drawing the constitution, you draw it almost as though it was an exercise in mathematical formalism. You go completely context free. And the same fault in the foundation comes about when we analyze the foundation of modernity. That it is based on a complete break from the past. And it is based on this tabula rasa thinking. So when we get into tabula rasa thinking, what happens? The tabula rasa thinking or the blank paper thinking, which is at the core of the foundation of modernity, our constitution, and wokeism, that tabula rasa thinking is based upon these characteristics. One, it is almost like mathematical formal thinking, where you are thinking concepts almost as though they are tautologies, empty of content in themselves. So this is purest form of structural essential thinking without any specifics, without any context. Leave apart the question of sustainability and scale. It is a context-free thinking. It is a thinking which does not accept design in the world, design in the mind, design in history. Because design, the moment you accept the concept of design in the human mind, in society, in history, or on the planet, the design will lead to inevitably two questions: the question of origin and the question of purpose. And that in turn will lead spiritually, philosophically towards religion or spirituality, or in everyday life, in operational terms, it will lead to boundaries of discipline. It will inevitably lead to do's and don'ts coming out of that design. Similarly, this thinking is evolution-free thinking, because evolution will constrain and provide a direction. You cannot have I will do what I like and call it science. It's not a free for all. The moment you accept design, the moment you accept evolution, it's not a free for all. So this tabula rasa thinking is formal thinking, context free thinking, design free thinking, evolution free thinking, history free thinking. There is always a radical break. So when you talk of evolution free, you say the moment the human species starts, almost a new science starts. We are not extension of any other species. We are completely new and we can do and we are free to do what we want. That is where the social construction theory comes about. Unless you say goodbye to the element of design and evolution, you cannot have the theory of social constructivism. It's also history free. The moment you start looking at the purpose of history, do's and don'ts will naturally come out from there. And you cannot have a free for all the moment you accept history. This is tradition free. Very importantly, it is sustainability free. And that is how wokeism is able to market itself, because it has not yet put itself to the scrutiny of sustainability. The sustainability is a very important criteria in any social, any cultural discussion. The idea is this: if you say X is fine, let us say everyone in society does X, then what happens? First criteria of sustainability is stretch on the scale. Whatever the idea, stretch it to the whole society and say, if everyone does it, what happens? Two, stretch it over a period of history. So there are two stretches: a stretch over scale of society and stretch over history. The two stretches. And there the cascading effects will come. And cascading effect is not just an arithmetic addition. If you allow cascading to happen, at some point emergence. For example, if you look at women's rights and the lib movement coming in United States around 50s, 60s, the first generation, it was a release from suffering. It was an addition to the workforce. And suddenly you have a burst in productivity, a spike in productivity, and a spike in social well-being. Because much of the discipline, much of the duty orientation of the past was still in effect. So in effect, actually, you were at the golden mean of individual and the collective. The next generation, the individualism goes very high and the collectivism goes very low. It becomes a rights society without any sense of duties. And the third generation finds it taboo even to talk about duties. They start living in a completely artificial world, which is the woke world. A world of artificial make-believe and the world of entitlement and the world of fragile narcissism. So when we look at stretch over history, third generation of the liberal society, and the society does not have population enough to be sustainable. It has to call immigrants from outside. So when you look at these two stretches for ascertaining sustainability, the stretch of scale and stretch over time, and see what would happen if this idea X was stretched over the whole society and this was allowed to go on for 100 years, what happens then? Is this idea enhancing the sustainability of society? Or is it leading to dysfunctionality either right now or out of its cascading and emergence effects down the line in time? And the next is, so this, the way you put this thing, it will bring in the notion of balance, control, the idea of duty and so on. So this tabula rasa theory is actually a sustainability free. It's not actually tabula rasa thinking, but it's the way it is deployed in these three contexts that we are talking about: modernity, Indian constitution, and wokeism. And then we have spirituality free. Modernity, the foundation of modernity is spirituality free. It's a secular foundation. Same for Indian constitution, it's spirituality free, based on a secular foundation. And wokeism is completely based upon secular foundations. Spirituality can't come near to wokeism. Now, what has happened to this thinking? This thinking, the moment it was stretched across all societies in terms of scale, we had all sorts of crises. We had economic crisis, we have environmental crisis, we have human crisis, we have crisis of inequality and all sorts of things. In fact, there is a global cultural crisis, which we don't want to accept because we don't have a solution, and we have to accept our faults and unsustainability of our values, which we don't want to. So the moment the idea of modernity was stretched across to the world, a new set of problems came up, from social, cultural, economic to environment. And the moment it was stretched over 3 generations, the problems took countries and societies into crises, many of which have never been able to come out of those crises. It's just one crisis after another. Because there is a fault at the fundamentals, and the fault has become big enough to exert itself in real life. So what we see is it has not worked. It has not proven sustainability either across the scale or over time. Both ways, modernity has not proved sustainable, and therefore we are now seeing the closure of modernity. Some people talk about modernity having ended. My personal feeling is it is in the process, and around 2032, we should see a complete closure of modernity. So blank paper thinking, tabula rasa thinking is coming to an end with a bang of wokeism. Wokeism probably is the last ideology of the modern era. Let us come to the Indian Constitution. We should not forget that the Indian Constitution is a creation of modernity. It is not the creation of timeless wisdom of Hinduism. The framers of the Constitution were in the grip of modernity because they were seeing the worst phase of Hinduism. So no ideology can remain at its peak forever. Everything moves in a wave function. So when we have Hinduism at its bottom and modernity at its top, there is no wonder that those who lived in those times would see modernity as the best choice for the country. But it's a very temporal thinking and doesn't have the color of timeless spirituality of Hinduism. So now what we have is there is an ancient civilization and a constitution based upon modernity with a flavor of wokeism coming in recent times. And what it does to a common man is the constitution appears foreign, unnatural, contrary to historical experience, disrespectful of history and tradition. And therefore, Hindus by and large have come to a conclusion that there is a need for a new Hindu constitution and a Hindu Rashtra. Two important elements are worth mentioning in this context. There is no mention in the constitution or any policy of the Hindu Holocaust of 1,000 years. And as we come out of the colonial fabricated manufactured history and we start to know our true history, the first fact which comes up before us is the fact of the Hindu Holocaust, the Holocaust of 1,000 years, far more extensive and far more tragic than the Jewish Holocaust. So first is the constitution simply omits this whole important aspect of history because it's a contextual, a historical. And second, it omits completely spirituality. So these two central points of human existence of Hindus are completely omitted by the constitution. So how can a constitution which omits the two central core ideas in the mind of an Hindu be the constitution of a predominantly Hindu country? Secularism tore through the heart of Hinduism. And what is happening now is the sanitized, isolated, formal temporality of the constitution is coming to an end with the closure of modernity. And this process is not peculiar to India. This process is happening or will happen in many countries across the world. It's a global process where with the closure of modernity, constitutions which were based upon modernity will also have a closure and new constitutions will come. So the transition to a post-modern, not post-modern in the sense of postmodernism, but let me phrase it differently. The transition from transcending, the transition of transcending from modernity to its new positive successor will also entail in its wake new constitutions being created across the world. India is no exception. So it's a part of a larger global historical movement that it's inevitable that many countries across the world and India definitely soon will have a new constitution, a Hindu constitution for a Hindu nation. And it is a natural historical outcome of closure of modernity because the present constitution is based upon modernity. And with the closure of modernity, the present constitution inevitably will have a closure. Let us now look at what modernity is and what foundation it rests upon. So if you look at the foundation of modernity, which we say is at fault, there is a fault in the foundation. The foundational values of modernity are rationalism, which is to say reason is supreme. Second, empiricism, which is to say laboratory sciences are supreme. Reductionism, which is to say you develop scientific knowledge by going deeper and focusing narrower, not caring about how the whole affects the part, as though the part is independent of the whole and determines the whole, which is not necessarily true because often the part acts the way it does under the influence of the whole, and if the whole changes, the same part behaves differently. And second, the part may get constituted itself under the influence of the whole in certain situations. So the part is neither independent nor determining of the whole. But reductionism is based upon this thinking of the part being independent and determining of the whole, and smaller the part, the more is the independence and more is the power to determine. and there is no communication between the whole and the part in terms of characteristics of the part. Also, the whole cannot do anything except what the part determines it to do. So that's reductionism. Individualism and hedonism. So these were the founding values of modernity. Now, where it fails in sustainability, the way we talked about, stretch on the scale, stretch on the time. It fails in naturalness, it's completely away from nature, completely ungrounded in any sort of organicity, having said goodbye to everything archetypical, deprived of all mythology, which is so sustaining. So it fails. So this modernity fails on the aspects of sustainability, naturalness, an inability to factor in evolution. And here there is a interesting turn. Modernity accepts evolution when it comes to biology, but finds it very difficult when it comes to psychology and culture. It's a hypocrisy, nothing else. It fails on holism when the whole determines the part, whole even constitutes the part. It falls on spirituality because that is where rare experiences and rare knowledge and priceless guidance comes from. And this is where it finally, because of all these five failures, it ultimately fails in terms of quality of life of the individual or collective. And we can see that in terms of the happiness index going down and the mental health crisis all over the world going down. We also see it in terms of the redistribution crisis, the inequality crisis, and a large section of the society just being written off and marginalized in the middle of so-called democracy. So these are the foundations of modernity and the reasons where modernity has failed and why the closure of modernity is happening. It's because of this failure of modernity that we are going into a stage of closure of modernity. Now let us get into the foundations of wokeism. The foundation of wokeism actually starts from Locke. The skepticism of Locke, sorry, not Locke, Hume, sorry. David Hume. The foundations of wokeism actually start with Hume. And the story goes as this. Hume put forward the proposition that all of science is inferred. No law of nature was ever observed. It's only inferred. And no law of nature gives us certainty that there is some necessity that it will always be true. And therefore, every law is a working hypothesis. And therefore, the concept of law itself needs to be questioned. Because no law was ever seen, it has always been inferred by the human mind, and nature provides us no guarantee that what the human mind infers essentially is a law. So it can be a summary of experiences we have. There is no necessity in that summary to be called a law. This led Immanuel Kant to go into the epistemology of mind and come to conclude that Hume was wrong. Laws can be enduring because if the law is based not only upon the way the world works, but also based upon the fundamental laws on which our mind works. And if there is that congruence, because of the inevitability with which our minds have to work, if that inevitability is shared by a law, then that law is universal, at least for the human species. So what the Kant did was, he narrowed the scope of possible knowledge in two ways, three ways. One, that we cannot know the thing in itself because we can know anything only after we analyze the stimulus that comes from that object. And there are limitations on our ability to sense stimuli and to make sense and interpret the stimuli. So recognition of a stimulus, processing of the stimulus, and making meaning out of the stimulus at all three levels, we have limitations. So we can never know what the thing in itself is, the first limitation. Second was, whatever we know is also permanent only for our species. If there is some other species which has a better thinking apparatus, a better sensory apparatus, maybe they know more about the same thing that we see in front of us than we can ever do. And third, this endurance, this reliability of knowing is limited to phenomena where we have a clear object and a stimulus in front of us. This cannot be applied to metaphysical concepts of God, truth, beauty. So there is a strict limitation that Kant places on the kind of reliable knowledge human beings can have. And this creates a dichotomy because there is nothing connecting the subject and the object except the process of knowing. There is no design at work. There is no overall organic fabric in which both the subject and object are embedded. There is no light on origin or purpose. And spirituality goes out of the window. And this leads to the whole, in living terms, it leads to the whole idea of the isolated man. An isolated man without any firm foundation related to origin, purpose, or ethics. And this leads to existentialism. And after existentialism, we get into the period of structuralism and post-structuralism. So when structuralism is not able to explain a great variety of phenomena, instead of moving into open structuralism, by mistake, it was an error, the philosophical movement went into post-structuralism. It's just another name for saying goodbye to science and hello to anarchy. And then we had, in post-structuralism, the whole idea was there is no reliable structure, no reliable foundation, which is the gold standard. And if there is no gold standard, then it just becomes a question of human consensus. And if there is no value in consensus, then it just becomes a question of individual belief. And then comes linguistic philosophy of what are the limitations of what can be known in terms of language. And that is where the post-structuralism and this linguistic philosophy, they come together to give rise to social construction, the whole idea of social construction. And that is where the first the feminist movement and then the queer movement takes it up. And then it's spiced up with gender. And once you spice it up with gender, it becomes inflammable fuel, almost an inflammable acid. And then it becomes a political movement. So this is the epistemological evolution of wokeism. It actually started with Hume. And what has happened is at every step, the extract from every step, if you do with an error, you end up at the end with a mocktail of wokeism. So they have got the worst of all the worlds. They extracted the most errorsome parts from each stage of the history of philosophy. So this is the epistemological foundation of wokeism. From Hume, we see a contraction of our belief in objective knowledge. So if you look at it from Hume to Kant to existentialism to post-structuralism to linguistic philosophy, and then to this whole feminist queer business, it is a receding of arena by objectivity and yielding it to not subjectivity in a profound sense, but in a shallow and anarchist sense. So there is a continuous receding in what can be known and with what certainty can something be known and with what objectivity can certain things be known, anything be known, and going into subjectivity, individualism, social construction, and I feel it so. So ultimately it ends there. From limiting of objectivity to complete elimination of objectivity and taking up the worst part of subjectivity, the part of impulse and anarchy, and raising it to the level of a philosophy. So this is there is a philosophical error at the root of wokeism. And one of the core issues has been when there was a movement from structuralism to post-structuralism. In fact, it should have been from structuralism to open structuralism instead of post-structuralism. That was the critical error in the history of philosophy, which has given rise to this psychotic problem that we see worldwide. The next stage, after this epistemological battle, it was not won actually, but out of this epistemological movement, the first theorization happened in the universities, and then it took a political color. And this success in the political arena was because it was supported by a very important, unrecognized, even today it's unrecognized, psychological pandemic of fragile narcissism. Because of the way children were raised in the West and the way the society functioned, children faced severe object loss in early years. It is said it takes a village to raise a child. And here you have not even nuclear families, but single families, single person families. It's impossible to raise a child with a single person family. Even a nuclear family, it's impossible to raise a healthy child. In the first 4 years, you can never do a 24/7 duty. you will be irritated after 3 days. So it actually needs 4 women and 3 men to really raise a child if you want to raise it extremely non-traumatically. And therefore, there is an ancient saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Because of this early life object deficits and this traumatic upbringing, which is an inevitable part of modernity, where you get into nuclear families and both parents working. It's a recipe for a worldwide mental health pandemic, and it has come true. It's no longer what if, it actually has come true. So, this psychological pandemic of fragile narcissism, which was a result of the way children were brought up in isolated, object deprived societies, that actually gave a fertile ground for this agenda to take root, because this agenda has a fragile juvenile defiance at the core of its screams. Wokeism actually is a tyranny of the apparitions. The fault of the conservatives, on the other hand, was there was a complete absence of spirituality, and neither social capitalism nor world peace can fight political wokeism without spirituality at the core. Because if spirituality is not at the core, inevitably it will lead to absence of social capitalism, absence of world peace, and therefore it will inevitably lead to political wokeism. Then comes the geopolitical use of wokeism as a soft power through ESG and using it as a fifth generation warfare to destroying the West from within, just as the West destroyed Russia from within without firing the bullet. So then China uses wokeism to destroy the West from within. The global jihadi network uses wokeism to finish off Western civilization from inside. And both jihadi network and China, they fund the wokes. So modernity stretched to the absurd inevitably has to end in wokeism. There is nowhere else it can go. If you do a stretch of modernity over scale and over time, it is inevitable that the end has to be in wokeism. So the closure of modernity will also be the closure of wokeism. So modernity came with a ban on Christianity, and it will leave with a ban of wokeism. So we went over this to quickly summarize it, the philosophical foundations of wokeism. It starts with the problem of knowing, first put forward by Hume, taken up by Kant, leading then to existentialism, to structuralism, to post-structuralism, to linguistic philosophy, then into the queer theory, feminism theory, and then queer theory, and then into wokeism. What people don't know about the philosophical aspects of wokeism, some things I have put on the slide. First, the problem of knowing. In the Western sense, if you look, the problem of knowing historically passes through in the philosophical world from Hume to Kant to post-structuralism to linguistic philosophy, or rather, you can put it the other way, to linguistic philosophy to post-structuralism, to feminism to queer theory to wokeism. But if you bring in the Indian spirituality, the problem of knowing transforms itself right at this point. Because the way Kant conceptualized knowing is not the only way Hindu spirituality believes knowing can happen. So there is no consensus on Kant's description of knowing as being the only way of knowing. And this Schopenhauer in the Western civilization also had pointed out that this is not the only way of knowing. Second, this idea of alienation of the subject and the object not connected with anything except this disjointed process of knowing. This was opposed by Hegel, and this is something which also in the Eastern philosophy is very much a part of it, that there is an organic whole and there is no part independent of the whole and solely capable or jointly capable with other parts to determine the whole. Wokeism also has, so when you get into the epistemological part of wokeism, it's a hollow part. The limitations of knowing that Immanuel Kant had put in no way lead to the absolute relativism that Vokes talk about. They base their idea on post-structuralism, which is actually a flawed construct. There is no way you can explain science using post-structuralism. In fact, not only science, you cannot explain even much of social sciences, the well-established ancient social sciences. Let me not use the word ancient, but well-established social sciences. Even that you cannot explain using Wokeism or using post-structuralism. So there is a error in the epistemological and philosophical foundation of Wokeism. There is no way the woke philosophy can deal with evolution and history or spirituality and history, this kind of linkages. Open structuralism, the link of reality and language. Instead of saying language creates reality, which it does not, language can neither create reality nor explain whole of reality. So if you look into Wittgenstein's work, language is more of a tool. It is not in any way a certainty or a axiom creator. And by no stretch of imagination, an axiom by itself. One important element why wokeism came up was because the conservatives could not understand and articulate very clearly what were the errors in wokeism. Second, they were shouted down, so they could not communicate. Second part of it. And third part of it was they have made, on the conservative side, we have made inadequate progress in addressing the philosophical lacunae on our side and in articulating a vision for future, which can be satisfactory to a large section of society, and very importantly, the performance in reality of what we believe in theory. So these were the areas where inadequate progress on the part of conservatives actually ceded ground to the works. One element also is of confidence in social communication. In general, the Vokes are better in confidence and social communication, more vocal, more creative in public communication compared to the conservatives. It's interesting to note that in the philosophical world, those who do philosophy professionally, feminism and wokeism, they have been relegated to the sidelines long ago. It's only in the area of journalism that they feel this is a contemporary ism, which it actually is not. It is because people are not in touch with the philosophical professional world that they don't realize that what is being sold as a hot cake is actually a stale discard of many decades back. If you look at the works, very interestingly, most works have no philosophical idea about wokeism or its foundations or the errors in its foundations. It is more of an impulsive reaction, in thing to be, something very in and very hot, something flavor of the season, and it is essentially on a global scale outcome of a psychological pandemic, that of fragile narcissism. So it is the impulsive reaction, uh, juvenile defiance of a fragile narcissist who often has queerness in himself, and that comes out as wokeism. An important element that people ask is, why did wokeism come up so fast? Because no other ism has come up so fast. One element of this speed is the fact that it is coming up in a world which is globalized, which has social media. Secondly, keeping aside the globalized world and the communication, what propels the speed of this movement is actually a global group of those with a homosexual or a lesbian orientation. It's derisively called a global homo lesbo gang, but respectfully, let us say we call it a global group. There is a global group of individuals with homosexual or bisexual or lesbian orientation. It's a very well networked group and very powerful group. Members of this group often are at very high places in institutions, in media, in politics, but they are not able to come out. And that is the drawback of the conservative society, that they have pushed this very resourceful and creative group of people into a stigmatized zone. And this group is now taking revenge in the form of wokeism. It started off as a movement for justice, but has now become a movement for domination. And we see the deep state The deep state in USA, in Germany, in UK, the deep state has members from this group. And it's these members who are globally networked. It's a global deep state network. The deep state of USA, the deep state of UK, and the deep state of Germany, and that sense, deep state of many countries. Part of those deep states are globally networked and together on this agenda of wokeism because of the deep state itself in many countries having members of this group. So it's a global deep woke state which is actually propelling this. This is where the resources come. This is where the power comes from. This is where the appointments get made to the universities. If we look at USA, Hillary Clinton, Obama, in the political area, they were responsible for instituting woke members all across politics, media, and academia, right down then to the schools. It's interesting to note that in many Islamic countries where homosexuality or lesbianism is punishable by death, there also there is a very strong group, which is a group of individuals with homosexual or lesbian orientation. One such state, ironically, is Pakistan. Even in the Pakistani army, the deep state of Pakistan, there is a very strong circuit of individuals with homosexual orientation. So, what propels wokeism so fast? It is this global group of wokes who essentially constitute the deep state of many countries. That is where the power, resources, and the speed comes from. It's accelerated by capture of the academic systems because what happens now is parenting has gone for a toss all across the world. What modernity has left us in its wake is a system which is just traumatic for raising children and nothing else. We just have to have a choice of soft trauma or moderate trauma. There's no question of no trauma. That being the case, children grow up without adequate parenting, adequate object relationships, in most cases without good parenting because parents are too busy in this competitive society to survive. Women don't get more than 3 or 6 months of leave after pregnancy, and therefore there is an early life object loss pathology setting in. And there is no natural archetypical social experience in growing up. Neither anybody is close to nature, nor anybody moves in groups, nor anybody moves in the relationship circuits, relative circuits. And this is what creates a global pandemic of entitled, aggressive, and fragile narcissism. And this is the crop that wokes cultivate. And they cultivate primarily from teachers. The teachers are the front soldiers of this woke brigade. Because the position of the good parents is empty in the unconscious, the teachers to some extent occupy that and then give fuel to the flames against parents, which easily the children can accept because there is a partial truth to it. So here we have a case of a semi-good parent flaming the fuels against a bad parent, and the child moves towards a semi-good parent. This then leads to the next part of the speed. So one accelerator is this. The core accelerator is the global woke deep state, constituted by members which are deep state members, but in individual lives, homosexual or lesbian by orientation. They in turn capture the academic system. Academic system accelerates this. This deep state also captures the media. The media accelerates this. The deep state puts people in positions of power. Like we have individuals who are managing large hedge funds, who themselves are a part of this global deep woke state, and in their personal lives are either homosexuals or lesbians. And they in turn drive this thing called ESG into corporates, and through that, the wokeism comes into corporates. So the deep state captures the academic system, the media, the politics, the judiciary, and the financial system. So then there is nowhere to go. The only thing left is the army in many countries, and that is next on the target. And once the army is captured, we should see takeover attempts or intra-army wars in many countries. Unless wokeism is eradicated completely, we are in for very difficult times in all democracies. The next speed up point is this. When you have teachers in the schools busy with wokeism rather than building competence, and we have parents who are not ready to invest into the child to build competence, we have incompetent people coming up out of schools and colleges, and they can't perform anything in the real world. So the only way for them to go back to is the college itself. So they go back to the academic system from which they have come, because they know they cannot be productive in any other system, neither in the NGO system, nor in the corporate system, nor in the political system. So they have to go back to that academic system, and the academic system creates these artificial jobs where you can live with this sense of entitlement and a lifelong college, a lifelong a life which is completely on the college campus. And that is where we have army of unanchored wokes living on the college campuses, because the college woke departments, they create these positions of teaching assistants, researchers, consultants, observers, and what. So it is perpetuating this wokeism by doles, because the university then becomes a social security system of the wokes, and then that is what multiplies wokeism. There is nowhere else they can go because they can't survive. In many cases, they can't even pay their loans. Seventh fact about the speed of launch of this trajectory, this projectile, is this. We often talk about when a nation transforms itself, a society transforms itself, and we say when we have a third generation of fully educated society. So stage one, society is not fully educated. Stage two, we reach 100% literacy, and that is the first generation of 100% literacy. So just as we have the third generation of a fully educated society, we have a third generation of object loss society. The first time both parents go nuclear and start working, and the child experiences object loss, object loss of parents in the early childhood, object loss of neighbors growing up, object loss of relatives and the village. And then we have the second generation where it is felt even more acutely. And third generation, it's even more acute. And there is a intergenerational multiplier effect which exponentially works. And there, when you have a third generation of object loss, that is where you start seeing this woke agenda. You see wokeism naturally coming up. It may be in different colors and flavors, but essentially wokeism comes up in third generation of object loss. This is where the stretch over time becomes important. That even though the complete society may not be in that process, but whatever part there is, that part of the society gets into a third generation of object loss, and then that part of the society becomes a woke part. So it was a global deep state political action to change the world into a version that the deep state, the woke deep state. So there is, now when you talk about the deep state, there is a country-wise deep state and a globally networked woke deep state, which is a, that woke deep state is a component of the deep state of each countries, and this woke component of deep state of each countries is networked together into a global woke deep state. And because of all this, especially the use of national power, national finances, and multinational financial institutions. That is how, with use of all of this and this strategy, facilitated by social events which happen as an outcome of modernity. These ingredients put together create the recipe for fast rollout of wokeism across the world with a speed which we have never seen any other ism roll out itself. Where are the inadequacies of wokeism? There are many. We have talked about the philosophical inadequacies. We have talked about the cover up of incompetence by wokeism. And then there are some glaring inadequacies. The first inadequacy is about the goal state. What is the goal state they wish to reach? And how do they propose to move to that goal state? And the analysis of the two above for individual and society. The analysis of sustainability of the goal state and the movement to the goal state that the Wokes propose. And what we see is they don't get into any analysis of this type. They don't have anything positive to offer except an anarchy which themselves don't understand what it will be. And it's not a state of philosophical or spiritual freedom. It is anarchy created by a childish impulsive rage of a fragile narcissist. Now, is there a other side to wokeism? What has the other side not done enough? And what are the questions that were rightly used, rightly taken, not used, but rightly taken up by the Vokes, although they did not rightly answer it. And these issues have to be addressed to really erase the evil of wokeism. The first is the faults in the foundation, the fault in the foundation of modernity, and through that into constitutions of various countries, and through that into systems, and through that in the society. There is no doubt that there are problems in every working democracy, and the problems have become intolerable at individual level. And there seems to be no resolution to those problems. And therefore, unless those problems are addressed, people will look forward to any alternative that is proposed. And this is one thing that we need more equal and more humane and more performing democracies. And unless those performing democracies come to stay, what we have at present is a sham democracy across the world, and that is not producing results, which is used by Vokes to further their agenda. Second is the reinstitution of the spiritual center into capitalism and allow it to graduate into social capitalism. What we have now is a heartless capitalism. We have to graduate it into social capitalism. I have detailed out the elements of social capitalism in another discussion. One possible alternative can be that of Sanatan economics, a phrase used by Ankit Shah, which proposes an alternative model. This can be taken as one of the inputs. You can have many alternative models of how to graduate into social capitalism. And I think using the experience of last 200 years and alternative models and the problems which present democracies are unable to address, a new model has to be created, a new model of social capitalism. Then there is this, so this is a practical aspect of it. Then there is a philosophical crisis where, as I said, from structuralism, we have to move to open structuralism. And from there, in open structuralism, we have to create a philosophical, spiritual and philosophical foundations of philosophical edifices from where axioms can be extracted out, and those axioms can be used as elementals to build theory upon. Lastly, you have this. So, yeah, one important element of the philosophical aspect also is creating a vision. Because after the capitalism communism divide, we never had a really good vision, philosophical vision to which we could aspire. And this vacuum of vision is hijacked by roots. If we work hard and create a credible vision, which I have put up in another discussion, where we have 5 elements of our alternative vision. I call it holistic spiritual pluralism and optimization. So on this holistic spiritual pluralism, if we get into the 5 components of it, which I have delineated there, we can create an alternative vision. This can be used as one input. We can have many visions given by thinkers, and we can put all of this together to create some consensus vision. And lastly, we have to address the deeper existential question of man and his condition on earth. This is something which has been completely bypassed by last 40 years of collective discourse. And Indian spirituality here has much to say. One part of Indian spirituality believes we are on an upwardly moving spiral, and we start the whole enterprise is to make earth and heaven equal and one. Another aspect of Indian spirituality talks about liberation, that nothing can be done here, and the best we can do is to liberate oneself. Those who believe in the earth and heaven equal and one, they also believe in constant optimization of an upwardly moving spiral. So, if we have to generate a positive vision, not the vision of renunciation, then the only way out is to have this vision of a enterprise of humanity, to have the goal of making earth and heaven equal and one, and a constant optimization on an upwardly moving spiral of the historical process. What can be the resolution of the whole thing? A global analysis and it's disturbing. A global analysis and review of modernity and the closure of modernity, bringing in of holistic spiritual pluralism and continuous optimization, creating a vision which is a synthesis of old gains and lessons of modernity and our collective imaginative thinking. In India, create a Hindu Rashtra, a new constitution, and acknowledge the centrality of the Hindu Holocaust and spirituality. Fight wokeism based on the premise of erase the evil. Change constitutions in many of the countries in the world. Change the diagnostic and statistical manual to include in personality disorders, a woke personality disorder, and in psychosis, a woke in chapter on psychosis, a woke psychosis, and recognize the global psychological pandemic we are in, the outcome of which is wokeism. And the holistic optimum in social organizations, sanitizing the university, media, politics, film industry. And graduating the raw capitalism that we have today, almost a heartless capitalism, into social capitalism with spiritual pluralism at the center. So this is the way some resolution can be effected and the crisis can be solved and a long-term basis instituted for a sustainable world. So with this, we end our discussion today. Questions, if there are, write them to me.